Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So by now, I would expect that you can tell me the difference between a steroid and a non-steroid hormone, the basic difference between the two.
Steroids are made of cholesterol.
Okay, so the steroid hormones are synthesized from cholesterol, and we could say that there's probably more that we could be responsible for, or no, let me start over. There's probably more that you will be responsible for in the future, because I look at this class just like the majority of time for the first hour class, that's the organic and biochemistry class, that probably 90% of the time, students who are taking that, they're probably going to be utilizing that in the future. Now, we can turn the clocks back many, many years. There's students in here in this classroom years ago that took organic and biochemistry and never used it again. And they knew that going in. But in this class, I think there's probably something a little more special with that. The idea that even in different manners or different ways, you're going to be utilizing this class one way or another, whether it's for the medical field or in other aspects. Okay? So when I say you'll probably be responsible for more steroid hormones, yes, that's probably possible. So we know the basic definition between the two. So how many steroid hormones are you responsible for? And I would hope, I wouldn't say expect, I would hope that we could say how many steroid hormones?
5.
There are 4. Okay? Then what in the name it'll say steroid hormones, and then it'll give you a brief term like a mineralocorticoid, a glucocorticoid, or a gonadotropin. So those, when you see those terms, it doesn't tell you the exact function, but it gives you somewhat of an idea. So, we should, no, we haven't done enough of this, because we had done that with the digestive system where we asked a whole variety number of questions. I don't think we could come up with 14 of them. We could maybe come close, but, okay. So what is an example of, now this is a more broad question, because now we are looking at the categorical functions past steroid and non-steroid hormones. So what is the composition of them? Okay, so we're past the steroid hormones. Those are cholesterol. What are other components that make up these hormones that are non-steroid types now? We looked at those. I think it was on, well, I'm not thinking. It was on page 491 yesterday. We spent some time on that. So there's polypeptide-based hormones. There's amino acid-based hormones. And then there's also a 4th type. Now, when we say 4, we said, okay, cholesterol-based steroids. Now we're going on to the non-steroids, which are polypeptides, you said. You said amino acid-based, and then there's one more. Nope, not that. I mean, it's what makes up amino acids. It could be a whole group of those that not just make up proteins, but they also make up hormones. You're saying it. Close. And it's got not a nitro group on it, but an amino group. And we call those amine-based hormones. Okay, so now we can get into more specific types of what some of these hormones actually do. So give me an example of a glucocorticoid. It could be any one of those. So this is where that chart would be very, very helpful. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. Insulin is a glucocorticoid. So what does that tell you when you hear the term glucocorticoid? It deals with, we could say, blood sugar, but probably glucose would be a better term, which is really blood sugars. I get that. How many mineral corticoids are there?
One.
No.
Two.
No.
Oh,
Three.
1, 2.
So when you're answering that, we're just not pulling these out of the air. You must be looking on this chart, which we had said is probably very, very helpful. So we said 1, okay? We would move past that. Aldosterone, that is a mineral corticoid, okay? So where did you come up with 2? Parathyroid hormone, or PTH, which is also a mineral corticoid. But then there's one more. It would be right next to PTH, or maybe right below it or above it, or calcitonin. So now, we've established what these mineral corticoids are, okay? So what do they do now? It must have something to do with a mineral. That's why it's called a mineral corticoid. So then what does aldosterone do as far as minerals are concerned? Minerals is something that you would find on the periodic table, clearly on the left-hand side.
Conserves sodium.
Okay, so why is that important?
Holds it in the blood.
Well, the sodium levels, if the kidneys are retaining sodium levels, a good way to define that or think of that is water will follow the sodium. So if the kidneys are retaining sodium, water is also going to be retained with that then as well. It's just going to hold that in. It's a way that the body can conserve water. Okay, what is the other 2 mineral corticoids? You said parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. So those must be dealing with which mineral? It is an alkaline earth metal, if you remember from your physical science days.
Calcium.
It's column 2, which is calcium. And that's in the name. That's why we call it calcitonin, because it deals with calcium. Okay? So the aldosterone, sodium, the other 2, PTH, and calcitonin deals with, as you would guess, calcium. All right. We will probably look in the book here in just a moment because we ask you to grab those. But at this time, we will continue with where we left off here. And that was non-steroid hormones. So we're a little past this, okay? So then testosterone and estrogen. Okay? What would you classify them? We know they're steroid hormones. So what are they composed of? Cholesterol. So then what do these 2 hormones do? Are they mineral corticoids, glucocorticoids, or something else? Why is gonadotropins the correct answer? They deal with the sex organs in the body. Okay? Whether that is different for men and women, and we had discussed those are physiological functions that take place within the human body. Okay, so these non-steroid hormones, okay, but we can come up with an example also of this first and second messenger mechanism that can also occur with steroid hormones as well, and that is why we need the book for that. And one thing to keep in mind is, remember, these substances are very, very powerful, have very powerful actions in the human body, because it says it triggers a whole bunch of biochemical activities, which is essentially true. One way to think about that is not that you can specifically remember this, but maybe back when you were 10, going on 11, then 12, then maybe you would have noticed, oh my gosh, someone tells you you are starting to go or grow vertically. Well, what's causing that to happen is a whole bunch of biochemical activity that's taking place inside the body. It's because something is happening inside your cells. They're really starting to grow, and especially in bone cells, okay? Do you think from biology, can you remember maybe what you might think of a long bone? Where do you think growth is probably the most common aspect that would take place where you start to go vertically? Femur would be one. Tibia. And kind of like telling a white lie or a fib. The fibula. Okay? So if that's what's taking place in the legs, which it does, it's also going to take place in other parts of your appendicular skeleton. Appendicular skeleton is your appendages. What's that? What? But you pointed at your head, though. Oh, okay. I thought you were pointing at the cranium, and I'm thinking, no, that's not a long bone. So where are other parts of your appendages besides your legs? Yeah, your arms. Those are appendages then as well. Which reminds me, as I was parking the car, zoology students. This silly or stupid joke, if you want to call it that, is anatomically inaccurate or scientifically inaccurate. So the question or the statement was, how do you get a laugh out of octopods? And it was, they got 10 tickles, or tentacles, 10 tickles. So octopods, why is that incorrect? It is a cephalopod that would be accurate, but not that one. That's one. Do octopods have tentacles? No, they do not. Who are their closest cousins besides that of the nautiloids? Yes, I had to think about that for a moment, but yes, squids. Squids have 8 appendages and 2 tentacles. So that's where the 2 or the 10 comes from. But again, octopods don't have tentacles. They've got arms or legs. So yeah, that's scientifically inaccurate then, correct? Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get past this first message and then start talking about what the second message might be. So what does it mean to retain something?
Hold on.
To keep it, that's right, or hold on to it. It's always difficult pouring coffee into a black cup because you never know how full it is. Unless you turn the lights on. I figured, I can do this in the dark. Just use my spidey sense. Now, as far as what specific examples of this would be, one of the aspects that comes to mind is your skeleton is constantly regenerating itself. When we say regenerating, there are certain types of cells that will actually dissolve bone minerals or bone tissue. So if it's eating that away, there must be something that counteracts that, which there is. Okay? And when we get to that of the skeletal system, we're talking about what's called osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Is anyone in here taking a medical terminology class? Or is possibly going to, can you do that maybe in the spring?
I'm taking mine in the spring.
Okay? So it's something like that that gets to be more important when you're looking at different types of words, because they have meanings with their different types of prefixes. Okay? So then the osteo portion must mean what type of tissue. We just told you. So osteo means bone. So an osteocyte is a bone cell. So then when we talk about the different types of ducks, your mallard, your green-winged teals, your buffalo heads. Oh, ducks with a T, not with a CKS. Those ducks. See how we did that? Did that play on words, you know? Get your ducks.
Oh, I
Get your ducks in a row. Yeah. Maybe you've never heard that before. And for those of us tuning in later, we will continue when everyone gets up off the floor from laughing because they just fell out of their chair. Okay. So we'll continue here in a moment. Okay. So then these different types of ducts. If you hear cystic duct, that's telling you the cystic means which gland? It was a long time ago. Which one?
By your heart?
No.
It's a stick duck would be
Close to the liver.
the goal.
Yeah, the cystic duct comes out of the gallbladder. So then cystic means gallbladder. So then if we have two ducts coming out of the liver, actually three if you really want to be specific, what term means liver?
Bile?
Starts with an H.
Hepatic.
Hepatic means liver. So it's those types of terms that you'll be using, and we try to refer to them a lot because it'll help you in your medical terminology class. Of course, the sites meaning cells then as well. But these other actions that might be activating enzymes within these bone cells, whether they are osteoclasts or osteoblasts, because I can't remember if we talked about functions of bone tissue in the biology class. We may have, but one of the things that the skeleton does for us, besides that of protection, we know that it stores minerals, which we will get into later on in this class, but it also provides sites for muscle attachments. And the only way that it can do that is if there are different types of bumps or protrusions that take place on the bone structure, because when you were evaluated for that, you just had to know humerus. That was it, okay? The upper arm bone here. So when we take this class, of course, you have to know the humerus. There's what we call greater and lesser tubercles. There's the surgical neck, the anatomical neck, the head of the humerus. And then there's different condyles, epicondyles, there's grooves, there's depressions in there. All of them have to be shaped by different types of bone cells, which is osteoclasts will actually start to destroy bone tissue, which it has to. Otherwise, you're not going to get these different types of protrusions and bumps that you see and feel, which if you have this portion, it's called your medial condyle, okay, of your humerus, okay, there is a nerve root running right by here, okay. So what happens is if you hit this on a corner of a table and all of a sudden you feel what's called a stinging sensation that runs through your hand, people commonly say, oh, I hit my funny bone, which we could be a little more specific than that. It's really not your funny bone. Yeah, it's your humerus. So that's where sometimes some of this common language can be that of utilized. So some other function of these proteins, not only is it destroying bone tissue, but it's also causing it to grow. And that's how you can feel these different types of bones and protrusions. And let's see here, I'm trying to think. At the base of your occipital bone, which possibly knows in the back of the head, there's a bump there too, because there's what's called the splenius capitis that attaches to that. And some of these muscles have common names too. We call it the muscle of frustration because, okay, we're shooting a free throw or we're serving the volleyball. We serve it and it goes into the net. And then you just go, ugh, your head points up like this. Well, there has to be a way that there's a muscle that attaches to your head and pulls that backwards, and that's what your splenius capitis does, but it attaches to what's called the occipital condyles. Okay. First and second messenger mechanism. It's sent from one part of the body, probably the pituitary gland. That's the first message. Then the second one is going to be the individual cells that acts as the second messenger. Usually we explain that with non-steroid hormones, but it can also take place with this, I just read, I thought, with steroid hormones. Oh, right here. Occurs with steroid hormones in as well. Then, okay, we don't want to get into the prostaglandins yet. So what I want you to do then is open up to page 492. So we'll stop there with this portion and then move on to talk about, well, what are some of these functions that we're talking about here? Page 492, where it says steroid hormones and thyroid hormones. Does anyone want to take a guess on where your thyroid gland is located? You might think so, but no. It's actually probably above your brainstem, a little higher than that is where you would find your thyroid gland. Okay, so on page 492, it says steroid hormones and thyroid hormones are insoluble in water. The reason being is because they're composed of lipids, we could say. And not that we could say, but we will say, okay? They are carried in the bloodstream, weakly bound to plasma proteins in a way that they are released in sufficient quantity to affect their target cells. However, unlike amine, peptide, and protein hormones, steroid and thyroid hormones are soluble in the lipids that make the bulk of the cell membranes. For this reason, these hormones can diffuse into the cells relatively easily and are able to enter the cell in the body. Once inside the target cell, steroid and thyroid hormones combine with specific protein receptors. The resulting hormone receptor complex binds to particles or particular DNA sequences, either activating or repressing specific genes. Activated genes are transcribed into messenger RNA, and the mRNA enters the cytoplasm where they direct the synthesis of specific proteins, which may be enzymes, transport proteins, or even hormone receptors. The activities of these hormones produce the cellular changes associated with the particular hormone. In the clinical application example is the steroid hormone aldosterone. Okay, is that steroid or non-steroid? It's a steroid hormone. Because typically we talk about these first and second messenger mechanisms being non-steroid hormones, period. But it also occurs with steroid hormones. From the adrenal gland, whose action is to stimulate the kidneys to retain sodium. Okay, So if it's retaining sodium, what do we classify that specific hormone as? A gonadotropin, a glucocorticoid, mineralocorticoid, and it is that. Why? Because what is it affecting? The sodium, which is a mineral. So that's why it is what we consider that of a mineralocorticoid. Now, notice it said it's released, okay, steroid hormone from the adrenal gland, whose action is to stimulate the kidneys to retain sodium. So we could say that this is an example of what we call a prostaglandin, and we'll get into that. An example of that means it's a hormone that has a very localized effect. So if it's released in the kidneys and has an effect on the kidneys, that is what we call a localized effect. That would be different than glucagon or insulin, because what do those two hormones do? Glucagon and insulin. Now, is that a localized effect, or is that through the entire body?
Through the whole body.
Yeah, that's through the whole body. So that's why those hormones would not be prostaglandins. Okay. In response to aldosterone, cells that form tubules in the kidney begin to synthesize more sodium and potassium pumps. These are the proteins that actively transport these ions across the cell membrane, in this case, retaining sodium. In some cases, steroid hormones may repress a particular gene so that it is not transcribed. The cellular response results from decreased levels of encoded proteins. So non-steroid hormones, okay, such as amine, peptide, or protein, which we would say is amino acid based, would be that of what we're talking about here. They're the non-steroids. These combine with specific receptor molecules on the target cell membrane. Each receptor molecule is a protein that has a binding site and an activity site. The hormone combines with the binding site, which causes the receptor's activity site to interact with other membrane proteins. The hormone that triggers this cascade of biochemical activity is considered a first messenger. The biochemicals in the cell that induce the chemical changes recognized as a response to the hormone are called the second messengers, okay? So there's a whole variety that we could use. So the first messenger in this is what we call aldosterone. That's a steroid hormone. So that aldosterone then that is released from the adrenal gland, which is not part of the kidneys. It sits on top of the kidneys. So then it flows into the kidneys and then causes the release of which hormone? It starts with an R. It's not aldosterone, okay? So what is the other hormone that starts with an R? And I got to look for it myself as well. To retain sodium. Oh, maybe we did not read that. Did we write renin down somewhere? Was that in your handout? No, that's not. Okay, so that's why we're not coming up with that. Okay, so we will address that again at another time. But that's an example of a first and second messenger. The first one's aldosterone. The second one would be that of renin. Okay? And another aspect that we will talk about that's also a first and second messenger mechanism would be that of parathyroid hormone. Okay? So I want you to think about, darn it, I did it again. I got those out of order. That's not a very good example. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I need to think about that a little more before explaining that. Okay, on 495 it talks about prostaglandins. We're not quite ready for that yet. Negative feedback, that's coming up in the near future as well. But I just wanted to expose you to what the idea of a first and second messenger mechanism is. It starts in one part of the body and ends in another part of the body. That's what I was trying to think of. TSH. Okay, look on the back page of your handout. That should be on there somewhere. Okay, there it is. It's close towards the bottom. It says, know the hormones of the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. TSH is one of them. It's called thyroid stimulating hormone. That could be an example of what we consider the first message, okay? Because that thyroid stimulating hormone is something that will induce or cause the release of what we call thyroxine. So what I want you to do very quickly would be the last thing that we do, and that is, there's a table for this on page 505. Okay? It's called T4, and it just means that there's 4 iodine groups that attach to that. That's the only reason it's called T4. We don't go into any of the chemical structures for that. So table 13.7 on page 505. What is the function of thyroxine?
It increases rate of energy release from carbohydrates, increases rate of protein synthesis, accelerates growth, stimulates activity in the nervous system.
Okay, so in a similar manner, one of your essay questions from last 2 chapters ago, if a patient is found to have that their parietal cells just are not functioning the way that they should, parietal cells release something very specific in your stomach. No, you're too far down the road. It has something to do with pepsin, though.
Oh, peptides.
No, no. You have chief cells and you have parietal cells. One secretes pepsinogen, the other one secretes acid. So then the parietal cells secrete the acid that comes in contact from the inactive pepsinogen that causes a chemical reaction. Now the pepsin has been activated. So if there are inadequate amounts of that acid, the patient is just not producing enough pepsin and they can't digest enough proteins. That's a major part of our diet, okay? Because if you're not digesting enough protein, you're going to be low on energy. Well, what would you guess when you read this on page 505? It says increases rate of energy release from carbohydrates. If a patient has an inactive thyroid gland, which we know has to release thyroxine, if that is not functioning properly, is that person going to have sufficient amount of energy? Probably not, okay? So then, as you look to the far right, where is the source? What's causing thyroxine to be released? What source of control? What does it say under there?
The pituitary gland.
Okay, so that is an example of a first and second messenger. From the pituitary gland, thyroid stimulating hormone is released into the blood. It doesn't have far to travel, just from the pituitary gland down to the thyroid gland. Then that thyroid gland will release thyroxine, which is very critical in protein metabolism. So if someone has an inactive thyroid gland, they're probably running low on energy. And that's something that could be treated, and that's something that a doctor would have to diagnose and then treat. Okay, that's all I have. We will catch up to you next time.